We're back in the lab, and it's always great to get your hands on some new technology that is going to potentially help our endurance performance, and that's what I'm going to be testing for you today and getting some insights into, doing a little bit of unboxing as well of the core monitor. You've probably seen these. The Norwegians have made these incredibly popular. Gustav Iden and Christian Blumenfeld, you would have seen them working with these over the last little while. I'm going to open it up. I've cheated a little bit. I've already been using this for the last couple of weeks in some training just to get some general data. We're going to go in and do their heat ramp test today to get some heat training zones and start to implement that into my own training to see what effect it actually has. Is this the real deal, or is it a little bit of a gimmick? So without any further ado, let's jump into it. All right, so here it is, the core body temperature monitor. Pretty interesting little device. I'll open it up. I have cheated a little bit, like I said, and I've already been using it for a little bit. So you can see there's a little plastic clip on here, which is the heart rate clip. But it's a tiny, tiny little device, little sensor that sits on the outside of your heart rate strap. And I'll show you where that goes in a moment. In terms of what actually comes in the box very quickly, open this one up. Obviously, instruction manual. Whoever reads those. Then we've got charging cable. We do have a couple of these heart rate clips, so you can strap it onto the side of your heart rate monitor, which is my preferred method, or you do have a couple of these medical adhesive strips where you can stick it straight on. If you're going to be training and doing things, I definitely recommend putting on your heart rate strap. That's more if you wanted to sleep or test anything day to day, I guess, in less intense circumstances. And a couple of stickers as well. So I don't know where I'll find a place for those, but we'll see how we go. So that's what's in the box. Let's chuck this one on, see how we go. All right, so I've got the sensor on the side of the heart rate strap. It'll fit any standard heart rate. I'm using a Wahoo ticket today, but it doesn't matter what you use. If you use Garmin or Polar, etc. It'll just slide on, and the little safety clip here, little black piece of plastic, just snaps in, just to make sure it doesn't slide off. Really important you use that. Have had a number of athletes contact me saying, it fell off when I started running. It's like, yeah, you need the little safety buckle. But then what we're going to do, you'll notice I've chucked some tights on. I'm going to also chuck a long sleeve running shirt on and a running jacket. Cap's going back on as well, because for this heat ramp test protocol, you can get the protocols off the core website. I'll talk about it a little bit more in terms of what we actually did and what it looks like when we go through the data at the end of this video. So stick around for that. But we basically want to try and keep ourselves warm. We're not in a heat chamber, so to speak, today. If you were in a heat chamber at 30 plus degrees, you wouldn't necessarily have to chuck all this on. But because we're going to be running it at about 23, 24 in the lab here, I've sealed everything off, no drafts. I'm not allowed the fan, and that's why I have to have as much clothing on as I can, overdressing if you like, to try and, reduce any impact of myself cooling down, because the whole point of this is we want to try and heat things up. So we're going to go through a process of jumping on the treadie, running through, gradually building my core temperature to 38 until we get to that point. That's actually where the test starts. So that's where it's going to start to get interesting. As I said, I'll break down the protocol for you in the data at the end. I'm going to be hooking myself up to a couple of different little devices as well, my power meter as well, to be able to monitor and assess some of that data. So let's get some shoes on. I've weighed myself. There's some hydration components into this. There's a lot going to be going on, but a really interesting set of data. Let's see what this heat protocol actually gives us at the end in terms of usable numbers. All right, so we're going to get started into the test in a moment. It is already kind of warm in here. It is currently saying 22 degrees on the thermometer, but I'm feeling warm. Core body temperature is already at 37.3 and we haven't even started. First part of this test is to ramp up. I go try and get myself to 38. That's where the test protocol is going to begin. So let's settle into it. Let's have a bit of a look. You're probably going to see me sweat a fair bit, and then we'll get to the data at the end. Let's go. All right, so we're right into it now. Heart rate's well up. We're starting to get to 180 beats per minute. Temperature's rising as well. So now the challenge in this test, and the next couple of minutes, once we get to the 15, and once we get to 38, we're not quite there yet, but we're just tipping on it in a bit. Challenge is now for us to maintain 180 beats per minute. Drop pace. Our cut point's going to be 11 k's an hour, so I'm going to keep running until I get there. Maintain heart rate of 180. It is bloody warm. I'm sweating a lot, but we drop it down in pace, maintain heart rate, and watch that temperature rise. So let's see how we go. RPE is up, I can tell you right now. I'm cooking. All right, we're getting down now, getting close to 11. Heart rate is just fluctuating up and down. I'm at 11, Paris at 180, as soon as I see 181, we'll call it. Oh. Whew. Done. That was hard. Oh. Test is done. I can't afford to cool myself down just yet. You've got to wait between 2 and 8 minutes. But I'm currently at, even though I've stopped now, heart rate's come back down at 132. I am, as a matter of fact, a minute 40 post-test now. Core temp up at 38.95 just before. It's just dropped to 38.93. I can see on my screen over there. So we've got to wait to make sure that we hit a genuine peak here. This is just an interesting point. It doesn't factor into any numbers we're looking at later. 38.98, still coming up as I'm talking. We just want to see this clearly start to drop. So once I get below sort of 38.5, that's pretty comfortable for me to say I can start cooling myself down. Again, no fans on in here. RPE was up. Like, I am feeling quite warm, and I felt quite warm for a lot of it, even though the temperature was sensing it was a lot lower than what it probably felt. That's probably a sign that I probably need to do some of this heat acclimation work and heat training. So we're just going to chill out here. It's still very warm. I'm going to get some water in. A really important consideration, keep a drink bottle with you during this test. And I'd probably recommend as well, as much as I've done this test on my own today, I'd highly recommend you do this with someone supervising you just in case. You can start to feel dizzy and nauseous. As someone who trains at a reasonably elite level, by no means am I an elite endurance athlete, but I'm at a sub-elite or elite level in terms of my own performance, umpiring-wise. I'm quite used to pushing myself quite hard and in quite adverse conditions. I mean, that's just part of my job in reality and what I train for. If you're an amateur athlete watching this at home, you're doing it on the bike at home, you got a treadie, you want to do this protocol, have someone watch you or come into a lab like we've got if you want to do this and you're going to use the core sensor, just as a safety backup. You never know how you're going to react first time. It's a really important thing to consider when we're working with hot climate as well, when we're overheating deliberately, and make sure you get plenty of fluids back in. So I'm going to just chill out here for a bit. We'll come back once temperature's dropped. Then we'll get stuck into the data, hey? Whew, it's warm. So really interesting. We're now 7 minutes, just over 7 minutes post-test. Core temp's still up at the 38.9 region. Hasn't really come down. Protocol ends at 8 minutes post-test. So this part is just something to note. Like, it's not something of direct importance to calculating those zones. It's just to see what happens. We are now 8 minutes. We're going to cut the test. We're going to download the data, cool ourselves off, and take you through it in terms of exactly what happened and what do we see and what does this all mean in terms of our heat training block in the next little while. So now we're going to jump into some of the numbers and the data. I'll quickly show the spreadsheet and how the data trended throughout the test first. Then we'll jump into a bit of a report I've built out showing my heat training zone and the key numbers along the way. So what we've got here is first graph that you can see on the screen there, heart rate in the red across the test, power from my stride power meter and my foot pod in the gray. And we've got a couple of colored lines sectioning off the different parts of the test. Now, the first 10 minutes is gradually just building some intensity, getting settled in, getting comfortable, starting to build some core temperature as well from baseline. The next 5 minutes is a bit more of an aggressive ramp. So we really started to push the intensity a little bit here. Got up to about 14 kilometers an hour by this green line. So that 15-minute window is typically where we want to get to that 38-degree temperature mark to start the test. It actually took me a bit longer, and this was the first time me going through the test, so I was trying to work out exactly how much I needed to push in the environment to get to those that 38-degree temperature. So it took me an extra 3 minutes. So 15 minutes from absolute beginning to this yellow line where the test protocol started. Now, the aim of the test from this point, once we hit 38 degrees, we need to maintain heart rate for basically as long as we can. So I hit 180 odd beats per minute. I needed to then maintain 180 beats per minute for as long as I could. And to do so, because I'm constantly heating up still, we're going to see heart rate drift if I was to maintain pace or power. So that's what you see with the power graph here in the gray, is it starts to decline as I'm maintaining heart rate. Power starts to drop off, and we're looking for a cut point in the test of a 20% drop off in that intensity. So from a speed perspective, that's the main metric I was using. I'm just showing power here as that secondary in terms of monitoring, and it's to show that sort of decline as we went. We're at 14.5 kilometers per hour at that 38-degree mark at the start of the test protocol, so to speak, after the warm-up ramp. 20% lower than that is about 11.5 kilometers an hour. I went a bit over the top and went down to 11 because I miscalculated in my head while I was running on the treadmill. You can see the recovery period after this purple line. That's the period once we finish the test. Obviously, power drops away to pretty much zero. Heart rate slowly comes down. I actually recovered fairly well, so I was pretty happy with that heart rate recovery response. In terms of core temperature, what did that look like across that test? So this second graph now, core temperature in degrees Celsius in the red line. Same markings in terms of the 10, the 5 minute, the 8 extra 3 minute period to get up to 38 degrees, the end test at the same point. But what we notice with that red line in terms of core temperature is it gradually increased to 38, obviously, to start the test, but then it continued to increase all the way right until that cut point, and even post-test. And as I mentioned in that post-test period earlier, it continued to rise a little bit. It eventually started to settle down, and you can see it sort of peaked a couple of minutes post, about 2 minutes post-test, and then sort of was just a bit up and down and sort of plateaued out at a bit of a peak temperature. Now, this stuff post-test isn't that interesting to us from a application perspective. It's more just an interesting point. So it was interesting to know that my core temperature got up pretty close to 39 degrees by the end of everything once I was starting to cool down and things like that, and it started coming back the other way. But end of the test, it was high 38s and working quite hard. Ultimately, what does this all mean in terms of numbers? How are we applying this in terms of a heat training protocol, and how are we going to use it? That's where this report starts to come into play, and we're going to have a look through some of the numbers here. So if I just move through here, a couple of key things to note. Air temperature was approximately 23 degrees. I think momentarily it got to 24 by the end of the test in the lab. Again, no fan, no airflow. It was hot. I was sweating a lot, as you could see in the video as well. Clothing worn, just easy one to note, just to keep that in mind. For future reference, make sure I use the same clothing in a future test. Interesting thing around the body weight side of things. So I started at 69.3, I dropped to 68.7, and I consumed about 350 mils. So we can calculate out what was my sweat rate in that period, given we know the length of the test, we know pre and post body weight, and we also know how much fluid's been consumed. You can have a look at some of that sweat rate data. That's not going to necessarily inform any training information, because this is a very different scenario. This is specifically designed to try and get my temperature up. In a training scenario, we're allowing ourselves to cool down in that aspect. So that's where your sweat rate's going to be different. This is probably more so a recovery thing, looking at the data afterwards and going, how much fluid do I now need to put back in? I got my drink bowl here with me. How much fluid do I need to put back in post this test to make sure I'm recovered up? Because it is quite strenuous. You can see I've lost a decent amount of body weight there, about 600 mil. I've put 350 back in. So all in all, my deficit is actually just under a litre for just over a half-hour test, which is quite a bit to be losing. And as you can see, I was sweating quite a bit towards the back end. Now, if we scroll through, we've got some of that information I just talked through. This is now the interesting part. So my core temperature 1, which is what was my temperature at that 20% drop-off point where I ended the test, 38.89 degrees Celsius. My heart rate stayed the same. So I was really strict. There's always a little bit of variation, but kept it as close to 180 as I could. And at the end of that period, it was exactly 180. If not, it tipped to 181. Treadmill speed dropped down to about 11.6, which is that 20%. So that's what we're looking for there. I did, as I said, went right down to 11 k's an hour, but for the purpose of the testing, specifically, I probably could have cut it at 11.6 and it wouldn't have necessarily changed anything looking back in hindsight in the temperature data as well. Test length from reaching 38 degrees was 10.5 minutes. Now, this is an interesting one for durability in the test, and for future reference, future testing, I go through the same protocol, same speed. Can I last longer before I get to that drop-off? So all that would mean is I sustain power and speed better, heart rate stays nice and level, core temperature just slowly creeping up, and it actually takes me longer to slowly ramp the pace down. And so I'm just handling the environment and those conditions a lot better. So length of test, I would expect with all of these conditions the same, with some heat training and adaptation, that I last a little bit longer. Peak core temperature 38.98, so I was getting bloody warm by the end. Heart rate at that point in time was 144 beats per minute, so well and truly into the recovery. And it's important to understand that post this test, you are going to still remain quite warm. And important to remember in this protocol, we need to make sure that we don't just rapidly cool ourselves down. We want to slowly bring ourselves back down. So now if we're going to look at the heat training zone, I'll bring it up to the middle of the screen here so you can see. If we're going to look at the heat training zone now, this is between 0.3 degrees and 0.5 degrees Celsius below that core temperature 1. So when we had it before, 38.89, minus 0.3 and minus 0.5 gives us a range of 38.39 to 38.59 degrees Celsius. That's the range of which, if I'm going to do a heat training session, so jumping on the bike or in particular on the treadmill, indoor, zone 2 type session, like warming myself up, overdressing, trying to get my temperature up, I want to get it in this range to get maximum benefit from a heat training perspective. Going higher than this isn't necessarily going to be any more beneficial to me. Going lower is not quite going to stress me enough. For the case of going higher, it's just going to be too much additional heat load in the session, and it's just going to fatigue me more than anything. It's not going to provide any additional stimulus. That's the type of thing that we're going to be really using this number for. Something as well we can start to manipulate using the core sensor in terms of sauna use as well, to have a look at, are we reaching this range? How long of an exposure? How high of a temperature? Different saunas will have different limitations of what you can do there. The core sensor can't be used in a sauna, so you have to. I was speaking to the core team the other day via Instagram. They got back to me and said, jumping in the sauna for a period, jump out for about a 5-minute period, measuring your temperature, go back in, come back out, is actually a good way to start sauna use and get used to that process anyway. But it's the most practical way of measuring the data as you go. So we want to use this heat training zone to get us maximal adaptation. That's going to be what I'm going to be playing around with over the next little while to see how much an effect some of this heat training can have to my overall physiology and performance. So that's going to wrap things up for this video. Hopefully you got a bit of an idea around the heat ramp test protocol using the core body temperature sensor. Let me know in the comments down below, what are your thoughts? Have you used the sensor? Is it something that you're now going to go look more into, and you want to reach out with any questions? Feel free to leave them in the comments down below, or get in touch on Instagram at @NJ_sportscience. Really interested to see where the data goes in this next little while as I start to implement and change things. I'm really actually interested in using sauna as a methodology to be able to get some of these adaptations. So I'll be bringing some of that to the channel over the next little while as well. But I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you got plenty out of seeing me suffer on the treadmill in the lab here in some high temperature, sweating a bucket load. It was an interesting test. It's a difficult test, absolutely, but I think it's going to provide some really interesting insight and data over the long run. So great to be playing around with some new technology. Looking forward to doing some more videos on the use of the core body temperature sensor over the next little while. And yeah, we're going to leave it there for today. So we'll see you in the next one.